Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, Tony, all yours.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for attending. I know that these are trying times, and that does sound like a cliche, but in this case, it certainly does apply. Can everybody hear me okay? I'll just need one or two people to say yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. And I just switched my presentation to full screen. Can you see it in full screen?
Yep.
Perfect. So as Bob mentioned, Tony Oliver, I know most of you today, and I wish this could be done in person because it certainly is a great topic and a lot of people have questions. So what we're going to do to maximize this is three things. The first one is I'll go over the presentation. For most of you, as you were registering to attend, there was a little drop-down box that allowed you to submit a question that you would like answered. So Steve sent me those late last week, and I got a chance to really review them and add a lot to the presentation. So the first half of the deck, the first half of the discussion will be just overall perspectives, and then we'll go into some specific questions. That being said, we may not have the time to go over each one of them, but don't despair. Not only is the presentation being recorded, but I'll also put this PowerPoint deck in PDF format on the website so you can access it that way. And third, you can always send me a note and ask any questions, anything that perhaps we did not cover or did not cover at the sufficient length. Make sense? Great. So, as Bob mentioned, the reason why we chose this topic is a lot of us work as VAs and we've kind of stumbled upon the profession, if you would. This is just something that we applied, we got the job, and we said, great, let's go ahead and do it. Some of us might have moved from a particular role to another, PM to BA, BA to PM. And then there are others who perhaps have worked in various roles and are looking to make that switch. Fact of the matter is, business analyst is somewhat of a catch-all title. And that's unfortunate because for a lot of companies, that doesn't really quite capture everything that goes in with that particular job title. And what I want to do today is cover some of the things that you can do to really differentiate yourself when you are interviewing for a BA position. But it's not just when you're interviewing, it's also when you're applying, also when you're actually performing the job, and if you're a manager or you're a recruiter, when you're seeking candidates that might fit the bill. So that's what we'll do tonight. Bob talked about me earlier, so I won't cover this. One thing I do want to point out is that the business analyst role is something that really continues to evolve. And you see that in job postings, both job postings that are positioned by the actual companies, as well as those job companies for consultants and contractors that might be going through third-party agencies. You see it in the government, you see it in private practice, you see it across all different industries. You even see it in the BABOK. When you take a look at how the BABOK has evolved, it has almost doubled in size in terms of number of pages since its first iteration. And that makes sense. Once upon a time, the business analyst, just do what you're told. And then it was more of, hey, why don't you come up with ideas? Why don't you take a look at this and figure out what we can do? And then it became more of, hey, we don't just want you to come up with ideas, but we want you to present those ideas rather than I'm the manager or I'm management and I'm going to go ahead and take those ideas and present them myself. It has then sort of pivoted more towards anticipating future problems, and I think that's evident tonight, right, for the reason that we're meeting virtually. And what we're seeing is that a very good business analyst, both in terms of the capacities and the skills that he or she displays, but also what the company seeks, it's all about understanding the entire business. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to be an expert in the entire business. What it means is that you're cognizant enough that an action taken in one point of the organization is going to affect the other portions of the organization. And that's regardless of whether you're working on a 5-person startup or a 5,000-person organization. So business analyst is more of a voyage, and a lot of companies are seeing that both in terms of their hiring practices as well as their ongoing expectations of people that they have in such roles. And this talks about a LinkedIn list that was published a few months ago. Now, if you do a quick Google search, you will find a LinkedIn list from 2020, 2019, 2018, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You will find something from a whole bunch of different places: Fortune Magazine, Business Week, Wall Street Journal. There is no shortage of lists. I think that we in the business profession, we tend to like top 5s and top 10s. I want to focus on the left side, the hard skills. And they didn't really come up with a good definition of hard skills. It was a little bit of the eye of the beholder. But you see some very technical stuff: blockchain, cloud, AI. And then all of a sudden there's business analysis clocking in at number 6. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because it is broader than the others. Now, also take a look at number 3, analytical reasoning. That is also relatively broad. So that displays how you see these kind of skill sets weaving from one side of the table to the other, from hard skills to soft skills and back. Looking at soft skills, there's creativity, persuasion, collaboration, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. These are all things that make for a great business analyst because it focuses on the analyst portion, not as much on the business portion. Of course, it does have a connotation on the business, but it's the analysis that really comes into play when you take a look at how do you go about determining what is happening? How do you go about determining what are the changes that are needing? How do you go about figuring out who's going to be impacted? So as you look at that, be mindful that this list did not come about in a vacuum. This is something that LinkedIn, which is part of Microsoft now, composed by a variety of different surveys and reaching out to companies both large and small. And as you're aware, LinkedIn is the #1 professional organization, as well as a big marketplace for job posting. So they have the ability not just to say, let's go and ask recruiters what they're looking for, but they actually have the ability to take a look at all of the words that are being used in those job postings. And we'll talk a little bit about that later when we tailor our own applications to the jobs at hand. So what does this boil down to? One, there's going to be a lot of competition. That's for sure. And you want to make sure that as you take a look at applying for one of these jobs, you are taking the right approach in terms of preparation. And it's not just, okay, I'm going to go ask some people, or, oh, okay, I'm going to read the job posting. Think of places like the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, the Sacramento Business Journal, Fortune Magazine, the Harvard Business Review, the MIT Sloan Management Review, and McKinsey. All of these places have free resources. Yes, you get the bulk of their offerings when you are a subscriber. Myself, I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal and The Economist. But for some of the others, you can get access to about 5 to 6 articles per month for free. So this is a very worthwhile thing to do when you're poking around and you're taking a look at specific job trades or specific qualities or specific specializations that you're looking for. You look back at the slide that I just showed with the top 10 skills. I'm pretty sure that if you were to poll people today, crisis management and risk management would be at the very top of that list. Now, you could make the argument that that kind of falls under business analysis, and that's fine. It speaks again to the overall applicability of business analysis. But this quote by Abraham Lincoln really takes it home, which is when you are applying, make sure that you're taking the time, looking at it through a fine-tooth comb. You're talking to people, friends, family. You're asking what kind of questions they would find. Don't rush to the application. Be mindful of the application deadlines, absolutely. But don't necessarily think, oh, I have to apply right away because otherwise X, Y, or Z. Doesn't matter if you're the first candidate or the 100th candidate, they have some times in which the application is expected. Focus instead of making sure that your application and your preparation really stands out among the rest. And in order to do that, you want to make sure that you look at how the application is posted. If you go to LinkedIn, it'll say, oh, you meet 8 out of the 10 or 5 out of the 10 qualities looking for this position. Don't just stop there. Don't be despaired if you say, oh, okay, only 5 out of 10, I guess I don't have half. Take a look at which 5 you don't have. Maybe you do possess them, but perhaps your LinkedIn profile or perhaps your resume just don't do a good enough job showcasing that. The second thing is you want to make sure that as you submit for those jobs that still require a cover letter and for those jobs that still require some elements of questioning during the application process, make sure that you're using all of the keywords that are being highlighted. And it's not about gaming the system. It's all about making sure that as you answer those questions, you are properly positioning those traits of your experience that cover that. Chances are, if you've been a generalist, you might say, well, gee, I don't have enough experience with this and that. But when you actually think about it, you do. It's just that perhaps you weren't the risk analyst or the budget analyst or the quality analyst. However, you were focused on those things. It's the same when you're getting your PBA or when you're getting your CBAP or you're getting any sort of PMI certifications. There's an element of highlighting that what role did you play in the project or in the business initiative and how'd you go about doing that. Ultimately, there are many applicants for every position. Up until very recently, it was really an applicant's market. And this speaks to a little bit of how modern recruiting and modern interviewing kind of fails us, which is a lot of times the interviewer is looking backward for how you have performed. And that's great. But just like for those of you who read all of your investment prospectus, it talks about past performance does not guarantee future results. You should be focused on how you're going to provide that value to your would-be employer, regardless of whether that's your current employer in a new role or a new employer, based on your experience, rather than necessarily what you have or have not done. If you are applying for an internal role, make sure that you reach out to somebody who is there in that group and make sure that you get all the information that you can. This could be an informational interview. This could just be a coffee. This could be just making sure that you understand by taking a look at presentations that that group has had. Don't just think that you can do one generic application and really get your message across. This here is a great example. It's a quote by Voltaire, and it just really talks about how we as humans, we have this need sometimes to show off everything that we know. And sometimes it's a lot better to just listen to what is being asked. Sometimes it's a lot better to ask more questions and be able to really get an understanding of what is being sought. There's a great story about somebody who goes to the doctor and asks the doctor, hey, in a word, how am I doing? And the doctor says, oh, good. And the person is really happy. And just out of curiosity, he says, well, what if you had to use 2 words? And the doctor says, not good. So it shows a little bit of the power of the questions. You want to make sure that you ask in order to get all of those different traits and all those different bits and pieces that you're going to use. Henry Ford, famous for many, 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 many things, it is known, or it is not asking enough questions. He felt that that person was not really taking a look and making sure that things were exactly as they were. Now I'm going to pause for a second because I just got a note that says my internet connection is unstable. Is everybody hearing me okay?
We missed one sentence.
Okay. On this slide?
Yes.
Okay. So it's all about asking questions. It's all about making sure that you have the opportunity to really chisel away at that block of marble to really get a good sense of what's out there. It's all about listening and it's all about understanding. We gain a lot more out of the questions that we ask than out of the answers that we provide. There's a great book, and there'll be a link on, I think I have it linked towards the end of the presentation. It's called Sigma. We use the 5 why. For those who are in the medical profession, it's all about the doctor asking the questions of the patient rather than jumping to a diagnosis. And speaking of books, there's one, the author's last name is DeBono, D-E-B-O-N-O, and it's called The 6 Hats. And in The 6 Hats, DeBono talks about all the different roles that one should play when addressing a problem. Now, there's a couple things you can do here. One is you personally put on those thinking hats one by one and get a good sense of what is being asked. Second one is if you're brainstorming or if you're looking at possible solutions, ask everybody in your team to play one particular hat. I won't go into details here, but as you can see there, there's one hat that's neutral. There's one hat that's emotional. One hat is logical but positive. One hat is creative. Another one focuses on process control. And the last one is more of a logical, but also negative. Now, keep in mind, there are other hats, and this one, the royal hat, who is invested, and they are subjectively seeking objectivity, which is a wonderful way of saying, I might have an idea, I might have a preference, but I'm not necessarily going to tell you. So this is a terrific book. It's been out for a while. It's on paperback. It is really, really helpful to take a look at all of the different angles that there might be. And this is a polygon, emphasis on polygon, many, rather than necessarily a triangle or a quadrilateral. In many cases, you don't know how many angles there will be to your project or to your problem. As you look and as you answer questions, make sure that you remember that you want to think like a customer. And in this particular case, every business, every organization has a customer, right? If you're for profit, you're looking at the person who is buying your wares. If you're the government, you're looking at the citizens. So you want to think like them, but remember that you are not the customer. That is to say that you may not necessarily fit the bill of that person. Perfect example is when you go into the grocery store and you see pre-washed, pre-cut vegetables. Chances are those go for about 25 to 50% premium over the unwashed, uncut variety. Now, there's going to be two groups of people. There's going to be the group of people that says, oh, great, I love this convenience. And there's going to be the groups of people that says, this is silly. Why would I pay 50% more for something I can do myself? That is a very narrow viewpoint. The people who take a look at it and say, oh, great, look at the convenience, I don't mind paying the premium, they might be looking at it through a couple different lenses. They might be looking through the lens of, I don't have time, so therefore I'm willing to pay for my time. They might also be looking at from the perspective of, I'm trying to eat healthier, and the easier it is for me, the fewer barriers there are, the more likely it is that I will accomplish that task. Don't be hard-coded into thinking, well, this is how I think, this is how I would react, therefore everyone would be. It is a very much a way to really lose track of the problem and really lose track of possible solutions. And note that I use the plural, solutions, because there might be more than one. That is not to say that pre-cut veggies exist in a vacuum. They don't. They exist side by side in many ways to those that are not pre-cut because people like options. And you, as somebody who works for a business, you're in the business of providing those solutions. You see this everywhere. And I don't want to pick on supermarkets, but you also see it with sizes. You might see something that is a fun size versus a large size. Well, you're paying more per ounce, but there might be a benefit to it. Or pre-washed, pre-hard-boiled eggs. You might say, wow, who doesn't have 10 minutes to just hard boil an egg? It might be that some people do. So think it from that perspective, and think it from the angle of how your customer would feel. Because that's the kind of questions and that's the kind of analysis that your business analyst interview will be seeking. A lot of folks also asked about, well, what if I don't have any particular experience within an industry? How would I go about doing that? My suggestion there is don't look at it as a negative. Don't look at the portion that you don't have. Look at the portion that you do have. If you think of human beings and you think of chimpanzees, 99% of the DNA is shared. So when you're taking a look at two industries, figuring out how you can go about the shared challenges. Maybe it's how to fulfill those customer needs, or maybe it's taking a look at how to alleviate supply logjams, or maybe it's taking a look at the demand being lumpy rather than nice and even on a weekly basis, or on a daily basis, or on a yearly basis. These are things that could really help you and help the business, again, regardless of whether you're applying for a job within your own company or with a different company. Suffering from stockouts. That is something that is the bane of a lot of different companies. When you have somebody who is willing and able to come and pay for your product, and yet you are unable to fulfill it because you don't have the service, you don't have the capacity, you don't have the inventory. Another interesting angle is talking about all the impacts and impact analysis. This is something that most business analysts are tasked with doing, yet sometimes they don't necessarily understand how to put boundaries. One perspective is, should everything be effective? My personal take on this is that as a business analyst, you should believe and you should imagine that any action that you take is going to affect others in your organization, unless otherwise told. A lot of times it's the opposite. A lot of times we say, well, there's not going to be any impact unless somebody tells me that there's going to be an impact. And that's a surefire way to lose sight of a lot of the people who might be impacted. And that's a surefire way to create unnecessary problems and unforeseen problems. Great example we're living right now, right? The coronavirus. When the news first came about, it was a matter of, oh, okay, it's over there. And then it became a matter of, oh, well, okay, it's only going to affect this industry and that industry. And as Bob mentioned earlier on, chances are every industry is affected, not just because of the interconnectivity of our commerce, multinational that is, but also even within the same company, even if you are within the same country. Even if you don't work for a restaurant, chances are that you're going to be affected by restaurants who happen to be closed during a particular crisis. You're going to have all the different elements of perhaps that demand being less than strong because of people who are affected by that. So keep in mind that change is not sudden. So those challenges that we're talking about and those impacts, they might not necessarily manifest themselves. And sometimes that occurs after you finish your project. Sometimes that occurs many, many years after. Sometimes that occurs after a product is released and a new product is brought up. You take a look at the transition of moving a customer from one product version to the other. A lot of times you have the challenge because you've produced a product that is so good, and it's harder for them to really gauge what they would gain out of that. What does this mean of you as a business analyst? Ultimately, it's that you have to be agile. And I don't mean agile as in Scrum or anything like that. I mean agile as in looking for a fail-safe, looking for options, looking for alternative routes. For those of us who spent many, many, many quarters playing Donkey Kong once upon a time, this is a perfect scenario. You're trying to climb up the ladder, you're trying to get some hammers, and at the same time, you're trying to jump over these barrels that are being thrown your way in seemingly random patterns. So you want to make sure that you're able to do all of these things at once. Is it hard? Yes, absolutely. And I'm not saying that it's easy. What I am saying is that as you take a look at all the alternatives, you want to make sure that you have that little voice in the back of your head or that little angel on the top of your shoulder saying, but what if this and what if that? So you understand what options you can take if perhaps a door were to be closed or a route were to be obstructed or something along those lines. And this talks specifically about options. You want to make sure that you are able, as a business analyst, especially when you're asked a question about what would you do, that you can explain why you would choose an option, let's call it X, but also explain why you wouldn't choose Y. This doesn't make you any better. Having options doesn't make you any less secure about your expertise or about your rationale or about your analysis. If anything, it showcases that you've realized that risk is something to be considered and that there are things that might occur that are outside of your control. To me, saying, gee, I didn't think of that is not bad. It showcases that there are alternatives that perhaps you did not look into. It's much worse, in my opinion, to say, yeah, I thought of that about that, but I didn't give it enough thought, or I didn't think it was important because it was a very small chance. That shows an arrogance in thinking that you can envision the future. That shows an arrogance in thinking that you know what is likely going to happen. Whereas in the mind of a consumer, there may be a lot of options that they take. And the business world is littered with a lot of different examples of products that were soundly rejected by the customer, even though a company thought it was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Another quote, and I believe this is the last one, but this is by Francis Scott Fitzgerald. And he talks about and I'll paraphrase it, but a first-rate intelligence is when you can think of two different viewpoints and you're still able to function. And to me, no better quote exists to really showcase what a business analyst can do and should do. It's that element of making sure that you're taking into consideration all of the different angles, all of the different possibilities without necessarily losing your mind. Because the more variables that are thrown your way, or the more problems that are thrown your way, or the more questions about your assumptions that start to really move the ground on which you stand and you thought was stable, the harder it is for you to really say, well, there is one solution. This goes back to thinking about options. This goes back to thinking about all the different opportunities. You want to make sure that you're able to take a look at all the pros and the cons. And you want to make sure that you're able to do this regardless of whether you're well-grounded in your position, you've been a business analyst for a while, or perhaps you're in the middle of an interview and you're given 3, 4, 5 minutes to ask about these things. In an interview, it's very rare to give the perfect answer. In an interview, the most important thing is to showcase your train of thought, which may include elements in which there are different ideas and different positions and different alternatives. You want to talk about your assumptions, you want to talk about your rationale, and you want to defend those without necessarily thinking that that is the only thing that exists, because in reality, that's not the case. I'm going to pause for a second while I take a sip of water, but I'd like you to think, what is the largest organ in the human body? And go ahead on the chat feature of the Zoom, and go ahead and type what you think the answer is. And I'll give you about 30 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show the chat. Okay. So first and foremost, I do want to say we obviously have a set of very smart people because I do see a lot of the same answers and I do see a lot of the correct answers. The correct answer is the skin. And most people don't think about this because one, they don't see the skin as an organ. Two, they might think of organs as only those things that are inside of the body, as you see here in the picture. So probably there is an element of the picture kind of leading you astray. Additionally, even if you think, well, there are organs that are outside of the body, such as the eyes, you might not necessarily think of those as large, so you discount everything else. But the fact of the matter is that the skin is the largest organ in the human body when you think of its length, when you think of its area. When you think of its size, if its weight, perhaps not. You think of intestines, you think of the brain, you think of lungs, you think of these things that, first of all, some of them are plural, lungs, kidneys, intestines, and some of them we just know that, gosh, there's got to be a little bit more than meets the eye because all the intestines are cramped over there. So here's a good example as to what is the type of question that the knee-jerk response might give you something that is incorrect because you're not quite asking the right probing questions. Now, of course, maybe you knew this answer. Maybe this is something that you had heard before, so you immediately got to skin. But for a few of you, and I did see at least one person who said, well, hey, hold on a second. How do you define largest? That's the perfect way to go about answering the question, getting to a sense as to what the interview is after and how he or she is defining the term that is being asked. A lot of times when we're doing that during an interview, it's not a trick question per se. They're just trying to get a good example of how you go about thinking. And we'll cover that later on. Sometimes it's just a matter of making sure that they can see where you're going. The faster that you provide a response without necessarily thinking about it, the more likely it is that your answer will be either superficial or perhaps seen from only one angle that may or may not exactly cover what the other person was seeking. Apologies, my PowerPoint is frozen. Why don't we go ahead and take some questions while my PowerPoint is frozen? Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question and blurt it out. Don't be shy. Okay, so we'll go back here. The classic element of an interview is using the STAR technique. And that stands for S, situation that's encountered, T, the task you undertook or your team undertook, A, the actions that were taken, and R, the results that were delivered. This is usually tried and true. I do want to point out a couple of things that sometimes lead us astray. The first one is we might lose track of time. And when we recognize where we are, we have spent 5-10 minutes on a question. And usually this is but one question in the interview. So keep in mind, one trick that I do is I like to focus, if I'm having a one-on-one interview or an in-person interview, I look at specific portions of the room, kind of like a clock. And I keep in my mind, okay, this is the S, this is the T, this is the A, and this is the R. And that way I can make sure that I'm not spending minutes, critical minutes, only on one of them. The second one is purposely leave out some details that will bring out the question from your interviewer. So perhaps there is a task that you undertook and you decided that that was the best task out of 10. Casually mention it. Casually say, hey, there were 10 things that we looked at and this is the one I chose. maybe the interviewer will have a follow-up question that will allow you to further expand on why that was the one action or the one task that you took that was really the one that helped you out. So don't necessarily feel like you have to answer everything. Allow them to kind of pique their curiosity. Think of when you're talking about a movie or a book or a TV show or music with a friend of yours. You want to have a conversation rather than necessarily a monologue. So with the STAR technique, it's tried and true. It's great, but just don't feel like you have to do an absolute data dump of everything. Think it more of, if you were in an analyst position and somebody says, hey, can you run me a report of all the data? Ask a little bit about, well, what kind of data? Why do you want this? Let me take a look at this. This is something that might be helpful. For those of you who are recruiters and for those of you who are managers, be mindful of this as well. Far too long, far too much, we focus only on the list of interview questions that you've been assigned by HR, and you are just doing check marks, check marks, check marks. You want to make sure that those questions are properly cataloged, properly vetted, properly calibrated to your position, to your role, to the opportunity that you have. So both for those of you who are interviewers, as well as those of you who are interviewees, don't go into autopilot. When you go into autopilot, you lose the audience, even if this audience is one person, and you're going to end up rambling, and you're going to end up with something that might have started well but ended weakly, or might have started weakly and ended strongly. Let's talk about an example here. So, how many gas stations are in Rancho Cordova? What is the first thing that comes to mind when you're asked that question? And you can go ahead and blurt it out loud. I think I heard somebody, but they were too far away.
What counts as a gas station?
What counts as a gas station? Okay, fair enough. Place that dispenses gas, sells gas, right?
What are the borders of Rancho Cordova? What are the limits?
What are the borders of Rancho Cordova? Okay. What else?
So Tony, for a
What?
question where you don't have the answer, how would you answer that?
If there's a question for which you don't have the answer, and this is the perfect example. That's kind of where I'm going, right? For most of us, this question would take us by surprise. We would say, I have no flipping clue, right? So the thing to ask is their interviewer actually asking how many gas stations are in Rancho Cordova? Or are they looking for the rationale? Chances are they're not looking for a number. They're looking for a rationale. They want to see how you go about doing that. So what would you do? You can showcase all the different steps that you would take to get there. You could take a look and you see the left side. You can figure out, well, what are the neighboring cities? What's the demographic of the neighboring cities? What's the population of Rancho? What's the population density? What's the area? What are the demographics? Are we talking about a lot of older people, a lot of younger people, a little bit in between? How about families? What's the percentage of car ownership? What is the number of jobs and how is the economy doing? What are the number of freeways that are around Rancho Cordova, right? Maybe it's not just the people who are residents of Rancho Cordova, but also the people who travel through it. And also on the flip side, maybe there's a lot of people who live in Rancho, but they don't work in Rancho. What kind of public transportation options are there? What about Uber and Lyft? Is it an Uber Lyft friendly city? What about taxis? What about urban design? Is it the type of city where there's a lot of sidewalks or the type of city that does not have sidewalks? What about zoning? Are gas stations only allowed to be in a particular location? Are gas stations allowed to be within friendly confines of each other? And more of a newer one, how about electronic vehicle charging stations? How prevalent are those? Not only does that doesn't affect the number of cars, but it does affect the number of electric cars. And the number of electric cars should affect the number of gas stations. So these are all things that you can start asking and start investigating when you get a brain teaser such as this one. And they come in different shapes and sizes. Microsoft was famous for asking why are manhole covers round? Or how many piano movers are there in New York City? Again, these are not things that are meant to allow you to zero in on one number and say, well, here's the number, but rather showcase how would you go about getting to that answer and what kind of data pieces you would find. Another thing that I heard a lot from the registration is, what are good questions to ask the interviewer? So here's just a small sample. On the right, who is someone who you see as better than you at something that matters to you? What is the most embarrassing moment of your career? When did you last change your mind about something? When did you realize you didn't have the skills or knowledge needed to do something? The first four, the ones that I just mentioned, keep in mind that those can be very easily turned around on you. So you want to make sure that you have a ready-made answer. And then there are some others that are very good for when you're trying to get a good sense of the company, the role, the department, and the industry. I like to ask, what do you see as the biggest challenge in the industry? I also like to ask, what other industries do you feel have similar challenges? What market trends worry, excite you the most? And whose insight do you seek when analyzing issues? The beauty of these questions is that as the interviewer is formulating their answer, you can then have follow-ups. You can say, well, why is that? Take, for instance, what other industries do you feel have similar challenges? You can ask, do you feel that is something that happened in the past? Are there any industries that perhaps you see having the same challenges in the future? Or you can ask, hey, looking back, are there any industries that you felt went through this 5 years ago that perhaps ours should have been mindful of? So be analytical and be very much forward-looking when thinking not just about the job, but also about the person and the company when determining what kind of questions you want to ask. And I'm going to pause for a second and do a quick time check. I want to see if there's any questions thus far. The next part of the presentation is going to be formatted as such. On the top left, you'll see what they ask, the interviewer in this case, and it's in blue, what they really seek in red, and then what you should answer or we should show in white. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any questions. And if there are questions, you can put them in the chat, okay?
Hey, Tony,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop the recording here and I'm going to start the recording again so we can split the recording into two parts.
Perfect.